Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about the strength duration curve, and it essentially shows the relationship between current strength measured in milliamps and pulse duration measured in microseconds to milliseconds. And these two are used to produce an action potential for stimulation of different type of nerves, which we have color coded here. And just generally looking at the graph and the relationship between x and y, you can see that as you decrease the pulse duration, so getting less and less here, we have to increase our current strength, whereas we get less and less here. As far as decreasing the strength, we will then increase the pulse duration to produce that action potential. So it has an inverse relationship generally. When looking at the individual nerves, we can start with our sensory nerve over here because that requires the least amount of pulse duration to produce an action potential. It can also require the least amount of current strength to produce the action potential compared to the rest of these nerve types. So that makes sense because these are sensitive compared to the rest, whereas if we increase the pulse duration a little bit more and increase that current strength, we can target our motor nerves. If we increase both a little bit more, that can result in a sharp pain, which makes sense because if we think of sharp, that's a little bit quicker, whereas if we keep going, increasing duration, increasing strength, we can produce a dull pain. And then all the way over here to our right is denervated muscle. So it's important to use this graph just to decipher between setting your parameter based upon the different types of nerves. There's a couple other things that we can take a look at, one being row base, which is a good rule of thumb to use when setting parameters. It's essentially the least amount of current strength with a long or infinite duration, because this line goes on, continues, to produce an action potential. If we take the row base and we want to stimulate the nerve, but we want to cut down on the duration, we have to double this amplitude. So whatever the least amount of amplitude required, we double that, and then we find the duration here. That is our chronoxy. So these are generally a good rule of thumb to use when setting parameters for a couple reasons. One being that anything below that red line here, so anything over here is subthreshold, and that will never cause an action potential. The nerve will not be stimulated. Anything above that red line will always produce an action potential. It won't be greater over here, it won't be greater or less over here. It will also always just produce an action potential. However, as you can see, it will also stimulate other nerves over here. So we use the row base and chronoxy as a general rule of thumb when setting the parameters, and we can adjust accordingly due to depth of the nerve receptor that we're trying to reach. Another reason we use the chronoxy and row base is to avoid accommodation, which essentially is when a nerve is not responsive or is less responsive to stimulation due to a slow rate of current. So if it's sub-threshold for a long time, then you increase the parameters. It might already have accommodated to that current and stimulation. So we use those as a good rule of thumb. You can use this graph just to decipher again between the different nerves that we may want to target. And that is all. Thank you.